There are a large number of situations that don't really match any of the tests for risk acceptance that we've talked about so far. We have situations where people don't seem to be doing any sort of weighing up of the exact amount of risk, any sort of trade-off, any sort of judgment against absolute benchmarks, any sort of detailed specific consideration of the practicability of each mitigation. Almost all of these situations fall under the heading of prescribed mitigation gives implied acceptability. So let me just explain what I mean by that. Let's take a situation where we have a bunch of workers who are up on a scaffolding. What is it about this situation that makes the risk acceptable or unacceptable? It's not a piece of paper that carefully calculates what's the likelihood of a fall, the consequence of the fall, the cost of each of the mitigations, and so forth. What makes it acceptable or unacceptable is whether they have in place the normal appropriate mitigations for these situations. And this is often in practice the way we judge risk acceptability, is if we've got the normal expected set of mitigations, then we decide that the risk is acceptable. The risk is acceptable simply because it's being managed properly. So a few specific examples of this. We encounter it a lot when we have standards for engineering, such as development standards for safety critical software. It's almost impossible to work out what's the actual risk of software failing. So what we do instead is we say, well, so long as the software is developed using appropriate techniques against appropriate standards by appropriate people, then we're willing to say that the risk of the software is acceptable. Not by calculating the risk, but by reference to the techniques and methods that we used. We do it also with things like codes of practice. We say that you don't need to calculate the cost and benefit of each mitigation for a well understood activity. What you need to do is make sure that you're following the code of practice, the agreed set of risk controls, risk mitigations for those circumstances. This is also what we tend to do if we're getting someone else to look at our mitigations. Essentially, we're getting a competent third party or peer reviewer to say, yes, you have put in place stuff that's appropriate. In other words, we assume it's acceptable because you've managed the risk appropriately. There's not really a lot more to say about implied acceptability, and once you think about it, you see it appearing in a lot of places. As with ALAP, acceptance is not based on some intrinsic property of the risk. It's based on the suitability of how that risk is mitigated. In Australia, it can actually be used as the basis for an ALAP argument. We say that if you've followed a code of practice, then you have automatically done everything that is considered reasonably practicable. Because it doesn't explicitly take into account what the risk is or unique characteristics of the risk, this is really only good for risks which are well understood. It's good where we know what the risk is, we know what's considered normally good mitigation, we can judge acceptability based on doing what everyone else does in that same situation. So it's very suitable for very well understood simple risks. It's highly unsuitable for unusual risks or for risks that we don't understand very well.